welcome to the show today. Today I have Andrea Bargetzi on the show, and she is the head of digital marketing and communications at Credit Suisse. And I'm very excited to talk to you today. Finally, we made it work. We made it happen. I'm very, very excited about this interview with you and hear a bit more about your story. So welcome to the show, Andrea.
Thank you for having me.
So let's dive into your story right away. Can you share maybe one or two really significant moments along the way of your journey that you feel really shaped you as a human being, really shaped you as a leader?
Yeah. The first moment that I would like to highlight is when I had the opportunity to move to Vancouver, Canada. I was working for a small company, privately owned, and they were in the business of communications and webcasting, screen sharing back then. And it was a big thing, but it was very new in the market. And I had the opportunity to move to Vancouver for the company and build up a new profit center from scratch. So I was all by myself in a big office, and I had to basically build up from everything from scratch. I had the office furniture, and I got one operator from the headquarters, and everything else I could do from scratch. So I could hire my team. I needed to generate business. So I had to do a lot of cold calling. I had to do a lot of travels, and I had to position this company in the marketplace. And it didn't exist in Vancouver. So it was a new market, and I had to establish a new market. So for me, I was doing everything, right? I was doing everything from HR to operations to IT to sales. And that shaped me a lot as a leader, because I understood how hard it is to actually persevere in a market and to actually make ground in a market, because nobody was waiting for this little company. We were no name, right? Nobody knew Course Call. It's just like, who are you, right? And I always got the feedback, why change if it ain't broken? So I had to deal with that all the time, right? It's like, it works. I can do conference calls with my investors. I can do my webcasts, but what can you do? What can you offer me that is better? And so I had to really shape our offering to generate value for my customers. That meant a lot of understanding what they need, what they don't get today. So what would be their needs that I can cover with the company that I was working for? Because it was a small company, and we had a small development team, and so we were very quick in developing new things. So I just basically listened to the market and was able to come up with additional features, additional services, and I was able to make inroads. It took 3 years, and then I was break even, but it was a tough 3 years. And that was very, very much the period of time that shaped me as a leader a lot, because different mentality as well. Canadian market, hire and fire. People are not as loyal as they are in Switzerland, right? Here you tend to stick with a company for multiple years. Over there, if they realize, it's hard actually to generate sales, or it's hard to sell the company and the offerings, they just basically quit and left the company. So I had a lot of turnover, a lot of new people. So it was a balancing act for me, right? How much do you invest in training new staff, right? And making sure that they stick around and are motivated to stick around. And that really shaped me as a leader.
I'd like to stay there for a second, because that's a really interesting one. Also because it's a very entrepreneurial experience. And I'm very curious about one thing. And maybe you're born with that, or maybe not. But how did you go, and I guess mentally, but also practically, from an individual performer to actually working with a team and leading a team, and not staying the individual performer even though you have a team? So how did you sort of go through that transformation? Maybe you can share some more insights into that. Very curious.
I have a huge drive, so I'm intrinsically driven, and I'm very passionate about what I do. If I'm not passionate about what I do, then I move on. And it seems as I have I don't know if it is a talent, but I have a way of getting people motivated, or they see me being motivated and driven, and I tend to be a role model, and they follow. And this has been oftentimes basically just me being me, right? Being excited about something and just being driven about something that was contagious for others, right? Not always, but and oftentimes it worked, right? And I am very transparent. I really like to work with people, and I like to understand how they tick. You know, what makes them get up in the morning, right? And I like to collaborate with one another. So I'm absolutely not a hierarchical leader. So for me, it's always like we are a team and we all contribute to one common goal. And we all have great skills. And how can you bring these skills together is for me always important. Because I think it's very important for me also to have people around me that are different than me, to just round up my profile and just have like a good combination.
Now that's an interesting comment there. Have people around you who are complementary, different is also something you said. That's a really interesting one, because I feel like it makes maybe things easier when you come from that perspective versus, I mean, you know, maybe the situation as an example, okay, there's 10 people in the room and everybody's very creative and idea driven and things like that. And one person has an idea and then 9 others jump around and go like, this is great. I love it. Fantastic. An hour later, everybody leaves. The week later, everybody comes together and they were like, the first one person starts and like, didn't we have an idea last week where we wanted to do something about it? So can you share a little bit about that in terms of how do you make sure you have a balance? So you know, you don't have the 10 idea people in the room and then the next week looks the exact same way and nothing ever happens really. Yeah, maybe we can dive into that a little bit. I'm very curious about that.
Yeah. Well, you know, from my personality, let's say I'm not the most creative person. I do have sometimes ideas, but I'm a doer, right? So I have a clear focus in mind, and then I ensure that I have people that are maybe more creative. But I always, you know, I come from like a background, well, initially banking, but then very much in project management. So I'm very structured. So I'm the structured person that has an end goal in mind, and then I surround myself with people that have, you know, different skills, more creative skills, right? But those are the ones that you always have to keep somewhere on a leash, right? Because it's immense what they bring as value, right? But you got to bring it down to earth. You can have the greatest idea if you don't bring it down to earth and get it implemented. It's no good at all, right? So I'm usually kind of like the devil's advocate to say, yeah, okay, let's just, you know, how can we get there? How can we chop it up into pieces that are digestible in order to reach our goal? And that's how I then try to basically hone in on things and move them forward.
Okay, so basically when working with very highly creative people, you're trying to be the bridge from the sky to earth, basically, and make sure that the creative ideas that bring immense value, however, just the idea itself is zero value if nothing comes out. So to have the bridge between the actual idea and the actual application of it and make sure, I feel like the way you said it is you make sure you ask the right questions actually, because you were diving a lot into questions that brings things down to earth and actually get stuff implemented. This is very, very powerful.
Was oftentimes also, as I used to be the bridge between business people and IT. This is what I learned, and I've been doing it for years and years and years. I had to listen to their ideas, which sometimes were very high level and very fluffy, and I had to kind of like think about it and start to, you know, how can I translate that into a solution? And when you talk to IT, you got to give them very clear requirements. You know, you can't just have a fluffy idea. You're never going to get what you actually would like to get, right? So I always had this two heads on. One, trying to understand the business and their idea and what they're really trying to achieve as a goal, and then translating it into IT technology.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially in those different groups, so to say, which are very, very different. I'm curious about you. You mentioned before you're also very structured and you come from product management and like, you know, and things like that. I'm curious about the structure of things in that context. So let's say you have highly creative people and then you have people who basically focus on implementing. So you have all these kinds of different energies in the room. How do you create a structure that works for everyone? that is not overly complicated, but that actually works.
Yeah. It is not easy, to say the least. You got to bring the people to the table, right? And and I've just been through such an exercise recently. And important is that they try to understand one another, right? Because I have highly creative on the one hand side, and then I have the project managers and IT on the other side, and try to make them aware of what the value is that each of them is generating, right? In the beginning, I had a lot of like, they were actually talking the same thing or similar thing, but then still they didn't understand one another. So for me, I try to then be the bridge in between, and everybody needs to make somewhat compromises, right, in order to be able to collaborate well with one another. And I try to be the bridge there in the middle to ensure that the creatives are happy and they have the freedom to be creative, but at a certain point in time, they have to come up with a plan or with output, right? They cannot just stay in the bubble forever. And the project managers and IT need to be understandable that they need their freedom. And you can't structure everything from the beginning, because then you're going to kill the creativity. Right? So it is a balancing act, and I think we have a theme here, and this is really moves on the table, which means if something isn't the way you like it, then just address it. Bring it to the table. Let's sit down and quickly address it, and then move on. And that worked very well for me and the team, because there is no frustration. Nobody's really holding something in. If they're not happy with something, they voice it. And then you can address it, and then you can move on. And healthy friction is good friction for me, because it means that we're having a conversation about something, we all evolve, and we all learn from it and move on. And I think that is, and I see that within the team, and it really, really works with the team, the way we're trying to work with one another.
That's really powerful, especially, I guess going back to the bridge, going back to, on the one side, understanding both sides, and making sure that then when you understand both sides, both sides understand each other. Also a little bit something else in terms of practicalities. So meeting structures, that's always a big topic. Everybody sort of like feel like they have too many meetings. Meetings are sort of like a good tool sometimes not, depending on how they're set up. What kind of meeting structure do you have? Do you have sort of like a standard thing that you always bring in, where it's a weekly, a daily stand-up, or whatever? Do you have something that you feel that it's really something that works quite well?
Yeah, we do stand-ups, regular stand-ups. It's not on a daily basis. It's twice a week, where we have a huge board, and because we had meetings before, we kind of like shared statuses, but sometimes if it's not relevant for a certain person, they just, on their mobile, or they just think about the next thing or the next meeting they have. And it wasn't very fruitful. So we changed the approach and said, let's have, stand-up meetings where we really work on topics, and try to iron out open questions, rather than just, this is the status. They still have to do status, don't get me wrong, but it is in a tool, right? They have to fill it in on a weekly basis, and everybody can go there and get the information. So you don't need a meeting for that. It's there. There is a status. It's, whatever, green, red, or amber. And there is a short summary of what the current status is and the risks and the issues we're facing and whatnot. But this is something you can, it's self-service for me. For me, it's more the important and the valuable part is the discussions, because that's how you solve problems or anticipate potential dependencies, or, you just grow much closer together.
So you got sort of like on the one side, there's the tool for status and sort of like more static stuff where it's just about sharing and knowing about something. And then the meeting's more about exchange in a way, in discussions. Is there a structure you use for those meetings, like 1, 2, 3, or is it open, or is it like different from time to time, or how do you work with that?
It is different from time to time, but there's always a structure. We have it like, the wall is quite big, and then we have the different sections we go through. And Yeah, it is quite standardized, but it depends also on what we're facing. If we have something that we see that we need to deep dive a little bit more, then we're not following the full structure. Then it's more of a discussion. So we try to stay also flexible in the meeting.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting, especially also on the one side. I mean, you're a very entrepreneurial person working in a large corporation, and there's a lot of dynamics there, of course. Now it's everything's about innovation, and so you get a huge structure you're dealing with on the one side, and on the other side you want to bring in the entrepreneur energy, and once again, that's where the bridge comes in, I guess, as well. And so this is really powerful. Now I want to go one step or one level deeper into the why. So I'm very curious though. So what is it that gets you most excited, that gets you up every morning to go out and do the work you do, face the challenges and have the fun and celebrate, but basically all of it? What's the reason behind it?
Yeah. Well, the field I work in is very interesting on its own. So digital and what you can do with digital, the enablement that you're able to achieve with it is just fascinating, right? Because it's fast paced, right? It moves quite quickly. Yes, I work in a big corporation, but nonetheless, we have huge opportunities to make things different, or to move forward and not do things the way we've been doing it forever. So for me, this is very interesting, right? Because I see I can do something. As I said earlier, I'm a doer, and I like to do things, and I like to see that I get something done. And in that space, you can really see you have a product at the end. I have maybe a new experience somewhere, or I might have a new tool. And when I see that I can also help people to get more efficient and to be more productive in what they do, it is rewarding for me. So we just started to, and it's not always just rewarding, it's also quite a lot of hard work, because it's change, right? And if change is difficult also for a lot of people, because they've been used to do something in a certain way, and now I come in with my team and I say, yeah, you know what, you could actually use this tool, and by looking at this and that, you could change your work to the better, which is not always openly welcomed, right? It takes time, it takes education, but to see how things get better is very rewarding and makes me happy, right? And that's what gets me up really in the morning. Plus, I have a really great team around me, and for me, that is, that's half the work, right? If you have great people around you, and it's fun to work with good people around you, and we really have a good time in the office, that's very valuable. That's really half the work.
Okay, there's some big points there, definitely. And I mean, one thing you mentioned is change a few times. So I'm very curious about that. So yes, change is hard. People are often the biggest or the slowest component in change. And then the buy-in into change is something completely different. How do you deal with that? I mean, you're in a complete change environment, obviously, in the nature of your work. So how do you go through that in terms of, okay, making people understand there needs to be a change, there's an issue, there needs to be buy-in and things like that, all the way to the actual execution, and keeping people bought in all the way, basically, the important stakeholders. How do you make all that work?
I try to work with facts, data, because data is very difficult to go against, right? Often, years ago, I was dealing with opinions, and opinions is very difficult to deal with, because everybody has an opinion, right? Whether it's right or wrong, difficult to argue against. So I started to really look into that data and facts, right? If I can come up with the facts that really support the reason for change, it's hard to argue against it. Or what I also quite often do, I come up with prototypes. I just say, look, this is a proof of concept. This is a prototype. Let's give it a try. Won't hurt. And if they see that it actually is valuable for them, they're starting to buy into it. They're starting to agree with it. Not immediately, but at least they're open, right? They say, okay, I'm opening. I open up to listen. And then it means that you need to also be mindful that you understand why they are afraid of the change, right? Because it might be that they're afraid of losing a job because something else comes up that actually helps them to do their job, or even maybe takes part of their job away, right? And that's why you need to be careful also how you communicate it. So the communication aspect is also very important, and that they have a stake in it as well. So it's not me like a blaze, like a bulldozer going, over them, but really just like, it's an idea, it's a different perspective. You want to be part of it, yes or no? And most of the times we get there, and that's for me then also very rewarding. If I see that people, initially they've been on the defense maybe, but then they realize the benefit and the value, and turn them into fans and supporters. And that's then great to see.
So one thing, facts, I really like that. It's hard to go against them. That's a big one. Yes, dealing with opinions is easier. Dealing with opinions is easier, but it's easier to start dealing with opinions, but getting buy-in and actually getting something concrete on opinions is way more difficult than with facts. And the other thing is communication. Making people understand the benefit, their stake in it. That was a really big one, that they have a stake in it, so they feel really committed and they have the ownership of something as well. That's really, really big. Let's talk about lessons learned a little bit as well. So along your journey, what is one or maybe two lessons you feel they made a really big impression on you, and you feel like you learned something really, really important?
Yeah, well, go back to the communication aspect. Very, very important, especially in a big corporation. You need to know who your stakeholders are, and who are the ones that are important, and who are the ones that you need to win as your supporters. So for me, a general exchange with my stakeholder is very important, right? So luckily it's like a long time ago, but in the beginning, when I wasn't putting so much focus on the communication aspect, I was a couple of times running into walls, into brick walls, because I didn't do this networking and kind of like trying to feel out the other person and whatnot. And then it's just a wall, and you can't get any further. And you get escalations and things like that, because people think you're stepping into their gardens and you're hostile, or you want to take over their job and whatnot. So communication is really, really important. And it's also something that I generally do with my team as well. We do this every year, at least once. We do a stakeholder map that we already know, where are they? In which camp are our stakeholders? Are they in the supporter or are they the opponent? And how can we actually win them over? And so that aspect is for me very, very key. And I learned a lot. If you're not communicating well, what could happen?
Yeah, that's a big one on communication, in terms of understanding the other person, and starting there. It's not anywhere else, but starting there and then building whatever you want to build based on top of that. That's a really, really big one. I think I'm very curious about is the topic strategy, because you mentioned sort of like the communication several times, and I'm very curious about strategy basically. So when you got a team on the sides that you have as well, because you're running a fairly large organization within the company, how do you work with strategy in terms of making sure that there's sort of like a clear vision there, and at the same time the down-to-earth people are also able to actually understand what needs to be done today, and tomorrow and the next day? How do you get that, I don't know, on paper? How do you make sure everybody's around the same table? How do you work with that?
So the past 3 years, I worked with themes, and it worked very well. So I had a clear idea in mind on where I want to be in like the next 2 to 3 years. And 3 years ago, I started with the first theme, which was called Brilliant Basics. Because I thought, we have a lot that we need to fix at the basics first before we run, right? So the first year was fixing the basics, getting good at the basics. Then last year, we focused on make versus buy. And then the entire book of work is basically, combined with that theme, right? So we were asking ourselves, what are the things that we need to do ourselves rather than get an agency to support us with it? And so I also reshaped the entire team, got in additional skills that I said to myself and to the team, or we all agreed, it's essential that we have these skills within the team. Because we need to know, user experience is, for example, one piece of it. Is that I need to better understand my users, and I need to have that knowledge in-house. I cannot get an agency in that tells me, how my users behave and what I should do for them, and then off they go again. No, I need to have that skill in my team, and we need to constantly better understand how our users tick, what their behaviors are, and how can we cater to their needs. So make versus buy was the theme last year. And this year's theme is firm up and scale. Because now we are quite stable, we have a great team in place, and now we can really get going and get the output. And that helped a lot, and people understood this is the road we're taking. And all the objectives also were revolving around that. So everybody was basically, going into the same direction. They knew how their work is actually contributing to the brilliant basics or to the make versus buy. And that really helped to focus the team. And it's also very transparent. So we share objectives. And we're planning again for March. So now we're preparing everything. And beginning of March, I have a huge town hall where we, openly share our objectives, and everybody knows in which direction they go and how they fit into the puzzle.
This is really powerful, themes. And I've been, hearing that before, exploring it myself. But you really bring it down to a very concrete level, because you make the themes by themselves very concrete. Obviously, I guess that comes from your very practical nature. So it's not like some fluffy vision of some distant future thing. That's also nice, but this is way more practical. And then actually getting everybody around the table, and also allowing people to challenge it, objections and fears, and sort of bringing everything, not just everyone, but also everything to the table. That is really, really powerful. That is very powerful. And it's really interesting from a time scale perspective that you mentioned the 3 years in the very beginning, and now the 3 years again. It's an interesting sort of like time scale that I see very often these days. The 2-3 year sort of like time scale is it's very interesting today. Many things seem to be revolving around that 2-3 year time scale these days in those very fast paced economies. Last question I have is a bit more up in the clouds, actually. Well, we know they're in the clouds, but a little bit more distant in the future. So let's say you're now 80 years old and you're sitting in your rocking chair, and you're looking outside, I don't know, your window, your terrace, or something like that, and you look back at your life, and you look back at the world. What do you feel would be one of the biggest changes that you would like to see in the world happening over that time?
I would like to see that we leverage technology for the better, meaning that, we start to use, energy in a different way, right? For me, it's very important that we try to start to preserve the world, right? Because, you see it now also in the news, a lot of talks about the climate. And I actually think it's great that the youngsters pick it up and really make the older generations aware of how important it is that we have a world that is healthy, that we live in. So I really want to see technology used for the good in the world. And, things like, from this 16-year-old guy that came up with an idea to collect all the plastic in the ocean. That's great. That's awesome. And we need to really use our creativity more for the good of the world. And this is what I would like to see when I look back when I'm 80. That we made the turnaround and realized that it's not just about money. It's not just about wealth. It's actually about doing good in the world, keeping the world safe, preserving also the animals, because we're not doing anything good for the animals. So we need them. We need the ecosystem, and that's important. And we have it at our fingertips. You know, we can do it, and that's what I hope we realize and we will do.
That's a really powerful way of bringing sustainability to a very concrete level. Thank you for sharing this. This is very, very insightful and very powerful. So thank you so much for being here. What we're going to do is below the video, we're going to link to some sources, so the company page, LinkedIn profile, and things like that. So on the one side, people can keep in touch and follow, and you know, the cool things that you guys are up to, that you're up to, you know, and you and the company's up to. But also connect, you know, on all kinds of opportunities. Maybe there's, you know, joint venture opportunities, talent opportunities. There's probably lots of things that come up along the way. So thank you so much for being here, Andrea.
Thank you for having me. It was great.